You're listening to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Show, a podcast to inspire physicians in the process of immigration to the United States and access to graduate medical education. We create meaningful and helpful content that motivates medical students and doctors throughout the world, with the goal of creating a community that supports itself and gives feedback to each other, that stays updated with the most recent tips and advice on how to make it in America and become a successful resident or fellow in the specialty of your dreams. Dr. Alonso Osorio is board certified and residency trained in both emergency and family medicine and will be bringing you 20 years of his personal experiences, struggles, and motivation. We'll be chatting with people like you to talk about the lessons they've learned along their personal path, how to make an impact, and how we can all benefit from it. Also, we'll analyse the current resources available and how to benefit from them. Thanks for joining us. Please enjoy the show.
Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Podcast. I am back after a little hiatus that I had for 2.5 weeks of not producing any material. And I hate people that give excuses. I'm going to be one of those. I'm going to give you an excuse on why I did not produce any material. No matter what, we're heading into almost 70 episodes. This is episode 69. And I have Dr. Roberto Ruiz-Cordero. He's a Mexican and an immigrant like me that has decided to leave his native country and come into the United States to become a physician like many of you. He had many hopes and expectations. And over the last 10 plus years that he has been in the United States and more than 13, 14 years of being a physician, he finally has completed his last fellowship and is a very successful attending physician at the University of California in San Francisco. And how we got connected? We got connected because I guess through my links, through my internet, he found me and we connected via WhatsApp like many of you do. He sent me a text message and I thought what he has to offer you and offer me and offer us is remarkably enriching, and he's going to be fantastic. So I'm going to introduce him in a second. And before we move into that, my excuse is I'm not in Florida anymore. I'm in Tyler, Texas. Tyler is about 100,000 people, much smaller than the 1.5 million of the Tampa Bay, St. Pete area. And I'm a hospital employee with the largest healthcare system here in town. And I'm remarkably excited. I've never been a hospital employee before. I'm super, super happy. This is the nicest practice I have ever had, and it's going really well. The family is finally moved in. Both cars are here in town. The kids are settling, getting acquainted to the town, and, you know, doing the summer camps and all the things that you guys will be dealing with in the future. So that's the excuse. And today's Saturday, my day off. Tomorrow will be Father's Day, and I'll be working. So we had this scheduled to happen a little earlier, and I asked him, Roberto, to postpone it a little bit. Guys, episode 69, super hardcore, high yield, important, juicy, amazing book. It's here with Dr. Roberto Ruiz-Cordero. He has written a book that we're going to be speaking about. It's the best moment, the best timing right now to be having this conversation in our podcast. July 1st is coming around. You guys are about to go into your new residency programs. You must read this book. You must have it. You must get it. Congratulations, you have matched. This is the book that you have to have. So please listen carefully. Be ready for the middle of the podcast. We have a lot of good information coming on. So pay attention. Welcome to episode 69. So without saying more and without being a talker, because I want to keep it concise and juicy, Dr. Ruiz-Cordero, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy Saturday and chatting with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I mean, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
It's awesome.
I'm so happy to be here.
Roberto is a pathologist, and I'm going to introduce, this is a very accomplished guy, and I never heard of pathology being such a competitive and challenging specialty, and this is remarkable. So Roberto comes from Mexico, and he, despite the fact that he's from Puebla, and by the way, I don't know how good is your soccer team, El Puebla.
Well,
He went to Universidad La Salle School of Medicine, University of La Salle, they call it here in America. I also went to Colegio La Salle in Bucaramanga, in Mexico City. And he is a veteran graduate of the William J. Harrington Medical Training Programs for Latin America and the Caribbean. And he successfully went to have a residency training for 4 years at Jackson Memorial Hospital with the University of Miami in anatomic and clinical pathology residency. Then he was not satisfied and happy with that. And he went on to do another fellowship from 2015 to 2016, University of Texas with MD Anderson Cancer Center in cytopathology, a fellowship in cytopathology. From 2016 to 2017, another fellowship in the same academic institution doing molecular genetics pathology fellowship. Wow. And I want you to tell me briefly what's each one of those. Followed in 2017 to 2018 at the same teaching institution to have a hematopathology fellowship. And now, after having had been hired by this very renowned teaching facility in California, he is in San Francisco and as an attending, as an associate professor of clinical pathology, assistant professor of clinical pathology, assistant professor of clinical pathology in the School of Medicine of UCSF, just completed or about to conclude his Global Cancer Fellowship, OMG. So tell us briefly, what's all this crazy, interesting, super specialized training that you have been doing for the last 10 years?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of like science fiction type of stuff. But pathology is composed of two main branches. One is clinical pathology. That's pretty much lab medicine, your CBCs, urinalysis. Anytime that you draw blood and send it to the lab, that's where clinical pathologists hang out. Microbiology is also a big portion of it. And then anatomic pathology is sort of like the complement to pathology. And that's where we get the biopsies. We can also do some autopsies. We actually have to do at least 50 autopsies to graduate. So forensics is also part of that, and cytopathology, which is looking at cells rather than tissues. And so I did that, as you mentioned, in Miami. And then it was interesting because I've always liked hematopathology, and that is the study of lymphomas and leukemias. And I went back to my hometown and I spoke to the main pathologist down there, and he was telling me that he didn't recommend that I pursue a career in hematopathology if I wanted to go back to Mexico, because it's a very expensive subspecialty. So you pretty much diagnose mostly leukemias and lymphomas and a few other like histiocytic disorders and a few other things. But it's become very complex in the sense that you need to look at molecular alterations to accurately classify and thus treat the different types of malignant tumors. So he said, if you come back, it's going to be really hard and expensive for you to set up a lab to provide all of that. And especially because in Mexico, most of the care is out of pocket. So people are not going to be able to pay you like thousands for, any type of sophisticated testing. So I kind of I listened to him, of course. And then I said, well, what's the opposite of that? And then the opposite to me was cytopathology, because it's very simple, very cost effective. If you just take like a Q-tip and you swab your mouth and then smear that onto a glass slide, you can use a quick stain, put it in the microscope, and you can make a diagnosis. And that's kind of what I do now. We have a fine needle aspiration clinic, the FNA clinic, where people with all sorts of bumps, nodules, you name it, they go to our clinic. And if I can palpate it, then I'll just go in with a needle, I'll aspirate some cells, stain them, and look at them right there on the spot. And for the most part, I kind of know if it's going to be a tumor, if it's going to be infectious, if it's a lymphoma, then, what additional testing do I have to do? And so as long as I have a patient, a needle, a microscope, and my stains, I can literally do that in the middle of the jungle, provided I have electricity to turn on the microscope. So that was to me the exact opposite. And I kind of always had the idea to go back to my home country to apply the concepts that, I've learned. And I still have that idea. I haven't given up on that. But, things change throughout the the course of your stay here, and you have to adjust. And then molecular pathology is the study of genes, like sequencing the genes of tumors to try to identify specific targets so that then the patients can receive targeted therapy. And so it's been a really interesting mix because it's actually better to do an FNA, get cells, and then extract the DNA from the cells, rather than the more conventional way of doing a biopsy and putting it in formalin. It has to go through a process where then you can put it in paraffin and make several cuts. Well, the formalin messes up the DNA a little bit, and so the quality is not as great. So that's kind of what I've been trying to explore. And then just to touch a little bit on the last fellowship that you mentioned, the Global Cancer Fellowship. As I said, I've always wanted to do something to give back to my country or resource constrained settings, not necessarily Mexico, but anywhere. I had the chance through the Global Cancer Program to go to Peru. And before COVID, we were actually talking to people to try to set up quick FNA approach to breast cancer in Guatemala. And we were also trying to go to Armenia. So, I mean, it's really interesting. And so I apply for some funding that my institution provides to encourage diversity, equity. And so I pitched this project of trying to set up molecular diagnostics in Mexico to study and improve the diagnosis and potentially the survival of pediatric cancer patients. And just a quick, I guess, number to throw out there. Pediatric cancer as a whole in the US and Europe, like the cure rates are approaching 80, sometimes even 90%. Wow. And in Mexico, as for the general pediatric population, is less than 50%.
That's sad.
So I got really concerned. Yeah. And so that's kind of where life has taken me.
Hats off goes to you. It's impressive. I'm getting actually goosebumps of hearing how complex this can be. And Roberto, Dr. Ruiz-Cordero, one question that I have is the fact that when I left my country, I do remember that we were really struggling to get certain stains, certain technology, and we even didn't have the place, the machine, the molecular tagging mechanism to do all this sequencing and DNA analysis and technology. And I know that this country of America, the United States, is blessed of having resources, the technology, the funding to get that done. And even I suspect in the US, you have reference labs that do extremely complex testing. But in our country, I don't know if to this day, we still have to go through the fact that there is a stop line in which we cannot push further because of the lack of funding, money, technology, etc.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also the human resource. Like, for example, molecular genetic pathology as a fellowship doesn't exist in Mexico.
Wow.
There are people that are very knowledgeable in it, but they sort of like learn it on the side, or they are like PhDs doing more of like molecular biology. But yeah, to this date, as far as I'm concerned, there isn't a clinical lab that offers high level of complexity molecular testing. And so I totally agree with you. I saw the resources that you could have access to here and the infrastructure. And so what we're trying to do is we set up our project in such a way so that they would do the sequencing in Mexico City because they have sequencers. And buying a sequencer, I mean, they're expensive, but for a country, it's not that expensive. The issue is running it, and as I said, the human resources that go into extracting the DNA, preparing the samples, and everything else. And so what we'll do is they'll do the sequencing in Mexico. Everything is going to be uploaded to the cloud. It's going to run through the same cloud that we use here for our panel. And then I'm going to be able to just look at all the data from, the comfort of my office or my house and
Wow.
do the interpretation and have, a communication via Zoom or whatever platform we choose to select.
It is impressive. Well, this is a pathway that I would like to probably get exposed so many of you listeners know that pathology could be extremely rewarding. And what led you to choose pathology as the specialty for your life? And how would you advise anyone that is thinking or considering to take pathology on how fulfilling or not, and what are the pros or cons of going into it?
Yeah, well, really great questions.
It
But
is a
very
complicated
complex.
question, but
Yeah. So let me break it down into pieces. So the first thing, why did I choose pathology? Two simple things. The first one is my dad is a clinical pathologist. So I've always been around microscopes and looking at cells under the microscope, but he only does laboratory medicine. He doesn't look at biopsies and any of the other, like the other part of it. And then in Mexico, after you go through medical school for 4 years, then you do a year of your internship. And it's a little bit different than the internship that, we do here, in the sense that you spend a full year in the hospital and you will rotate 2 months in obstetrics, 2 months in ER, 2 months in surgery, family medicine, internal medicine, and so on. And so I did that, my internship. I really enjoyed it. I decided to go to a not remote, but to a city that public hospital that didn't have many resources and they didn't have residents. So it was just the attendings and the interns. And so we had to do everything. Like I really wanted to get that exposure. I learned how to place lines and run a code. And it was just crazy because you don't have all the resources that you have here either. So it was a great experience, but it was hard. And after, I kind of liked everything. But then at the end of the day, I was like, I don't really enjoy the rounding. Like to me, I just can't do rounds. And it just so happened that I was doing the ER rotation and a 10-year-old boy just arrived pretty much dead. Like we tried to, resuscitate him, but he pretty much died there on the spot. And nobody really knew why. The family were coming from like 4 hours away, a really remote place in the middle of the country. They didn't really speak Spanish all that well, so it was a little bit difficult to communicate. And so then it occurred to me that maybe we could do an autopsy. And so I figured out what I needed to do an autopsy and figure out what had happened to the patient. So I got the necessary consents, forms and everything. And I remember I went to the pathology lab that was like, even it wasn't part of the hospital. Like you had to go through like where the trash cans are and, all that messy area of the hospital. And then there was the pathology lab.
I know what you're talking about.
And it was just so quiet, so peaceful. Everything was perfectly organized. And it was just one pathologist, like really nice. And so I told him, like, we had this case. Is it possible to do an autopsy? And his eyes went like this, like, yeah, of course. We haven't done an autopsy in this hospital for 10 years or so.
Wow.
I was like, wow. And it was, I'm not going to lie, it was shocking just to have a dead body and do the full autopsy.
And a child.
Yeah, and a 10-year-old.
And what did you find?
A meningitis.
Oh, wow.
So he had like very purulent meningitis. And I remember the pathologist, when he showed me the brain, he flipped it and we looked at, the base of the brain and the triangle of Willis and all those like anatomic landmarks. And then he was showing me like the fibrinoid material. And he said, this could be TB, like tuberculosis or
miliary tuberculosis.
Yeah, but no, it wasn't. So it was not tuberculosis, but he was explaining the morphologic clues that he was seeing and how those could be associated with many different things. It turned out that the patient had meningococcal meningitis. So we ended up having to take like rifampin and, the whole thing. But to me, it was a great experience. And just to close, then I ended up presenting the case at the monthly meeting.
Morbidity and mortality.
Yeah. And it was just such a great discussion because we had the clinical team, and then, and I pretty much just presented all the pathology. And since then I was like, I think this is it. And that's why I chose it. And I have no regrets whatsoever.
And your father, having had been a pathologist, and these mentors that you have had being pathologists, I think it was just the way to just kind of follow, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And my initial plan was to do anatomic pathology so that I could work with my dad in the CP laboratory.
In Puebla or in Mexico City?
Yeah, no, in Puebla. In Puebla. It's 2 hours away from Mexico City. And so since he was only doing lab medicine, my idea was to do anatomic pathology and then incorporate that to his laboratory, just to provide a wider variety of services. But I also wanted to do clinical pathology because I knew that at some point, if I was going to end up doing that, I was also going to be dealing with all the issues from the laboratory. And so in Mexico, it's separate, it's 3 years each. So I said, well, to be PGY1 twice and spend 6 years doing, CP and then AP versus going to the States and getting certified in both in 4 years, to me, it seemed like kind of like a no-brainer. And that's why, I decided to come here in the first place. But yeah, life had other plans.
Dr. Ruiz-Cordero also said that in his personal case, he chose the pathway of 4 years to get the formal training in both anatomic and clinical pathology. But there is residencies that last 3 years on their own to be just an anatomic or a clinical pathologist, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if you like microbes or transfusion medicine, for example, or just your benign hematology, you can just do a clinical pathology for 3 years. Or if you like either forensics or doing biopsies and looking at biopsies, then you can just do 3 years of anatomic pathology. And I've had some colleagues that they start as CP and then they like AP, and so they extend that extra year. And so at the end of their residency, they end up with both. So it's pretty flexible.
One thought, Roberto, that always goes through my mind is, do we have enough pathologists in the US? Because it seems to me now that you're so specialized and there is a need for people like you that have a specific niche. How is the shortage or not of pathologists in the United States of America?
Good question too. And there had been relatively recent papers on the topic. And one of the peculiarities about pathology is that because the lifestyle is phenomenal.
Great.
Yeah, people tend to work past their retirement age. And so this paper that I alluded to was talking that there are a significant number of pathologies that, they are really just, well, we don't really know what they're waiting for to retire. But when they do, then there's going to be a lot of open spots. And as of now, there is a little bit of a shortage, but I think it's just going to increase in the coming years from, what I've been able to read.
I came to America and I chose pathology. What is the possibility of having a success rate as an FMG, IMG into pathology? What are the chances if I'm really inclined to do so?
I think they are really high. And, I'm just a proof of that. I didn't have the best scores. I only did the William J. Harrington observership. I didn't have any other clinical experiences or clerkships. I also didn't have a lot of research. And to be honest, the only exposure that I had to pathology was this autopsy. Other than that, I had no clue what I was getting myself into. It was just after I matched and I had to go through like the first month of training that I'm like, okay, this is not what I had in mind, but it was still amazing. So yeah, the chances are high.
That's great to hear, because for those that are really considering having the fantastic lifestyle that you got, that is 8 to 5, or if you're on call, maybe a little longer, 9, 10 p.m. or so, and then having the weekends off to play tennis like you do and I do, and to be now home with your 3-year-old daughter, and your
Yes.
little recently born 5 months ago baby boy. I mean, there is nothing better than having the chance to be home to help out your wife. And
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
and you're
it's
located in
tough.
the best
Yeah.
part of the world. I mean, I know that Californians are going through a political segregation, and we don't want Californians coming to Florida or Texas because you're rising the prices of our households and so forth. But I know that people are leaving California, but everybody at the same time wants to be in California, and specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area because of the phenomenal weather.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. It's a great place. It's just ridiculously expensive, and it's very different from the other places where I've been able to live. But yeah,
As
I
you said, ridiculously expensive. I don't think anyone has an idea of how insanely pricey is everything around that part of the United States is so it blows my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to throw numbers out there, but just to put it into perspective, I feel tighter in terms of the economic flexibility now as an attending than I did as a first year resident or even a fellow.
Really?
Yeah, it's just, especially because of COVID, I'm blessed that I got to keep doing what I love to do. And it was just, I really feel blessed, but that didn't stop people not going into our clinic, or my wife, because of what she used to do, got laid off. And so trying to get by on a single salary in this area is really tough unless you are like a CEO or one of these entrepreneurs. But I haven't had that opportunity yet.
Yet. Well, I think you're an entrepreneur yourself, because one of the gifts or the gift that you are giving back to IMGs, your people in Mexico, my listeners, is this book that we're about to publish. And in Spanish is Macheaste y luego. And then you have an English version that is You Matched, Now What? So this book is available. I actually already purchased it yesterday on Amazon.com. So this book is phenomenal because as I'm looking through the index and the things that I have spoken, I never seen anyone compiling all the information necessary for a foreign international medical graduate to get settled and have an idea what it's like to live life in America, because nobody teaches you this. So I'm going to stop here and let you tell me why you wrote the book, what's in the book, and what are your expectations and how you want to help people all over the world.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. So, I mean, I guess you can, and I'm sure your listeners can relate to that first moment when you just land on U.S. soil, not as a tourist. You're now with a work visa for the most part. And then in a span of, I don't know, 2 weeks, maybe a month, depending on when you get here. I was just looking at the dates, and I first got to the US, I guess June 4th of 2011. So 10 years ago, pretty much exactly last week. And so, you from June 4th to July 1st, there are a number of things that you need to do and have in place before starting residency. And by that is just the basics, like really the essentials. First thing, where are you going to sleep? Like you need to find a house, like, somewhere to spend the night. And some people have relatives or acquaintances. And so, or you just like book a hotel, but you cannot stay in a hotel forever. Now it's probably easy with Airbnbs, which, wasn't available when I first got here, but everyone has to go through the process of renting an apartment, a house, whatever. And I didn't know what a realtor was. I didn't know what a shears check was, what a money order was. So I didn't know a ton of terminology and a ton of usual, normal, daily living things here in America that just because you don't live here, you pretty much have never heard of them. And so you either have luck or people that can guide you, or figure it out. You figure out yourself, and sometimes you learn the hard way. It hasn't happened to me about the scams, but in the book I do mention some of the scams that people use when you're looking for apartments. And it's also something that's very interesting about the States is that everything seems to be state dependent. There are very few things that are nationwide, and a lot of things depend on the city or the state where you matched and where you're going to live. Like, for example, in Miami, you didn't really have to pay for the fee of the realtor. The landlord took care of that. But a friend in Boston was telling me that as a tenant, you need to cover the fee of the realtor plus, a deposit and whatnot. So it's very dependent on the city. Then, like in Houston, when I moved to Houston, the main search engine is called har.com, whereas more nationwide web pages, you have Zillow, and of course you have like Craigslist. San Francisco, everything runs through Craigslist. I mean, you do find things in Zillow and in other platforms, but pretty much everyone uses Craigslist. But there is actually a chapter in a book of the scams in Craigslist. Like, they are so common. It's about the number that they throw in that chapter of the book, not the one that I wrote, but I do list the reference to this chapter in the book. And they say that about 10% of the listings that you find in Craigslist are scams. And so the point of the book is to try to get people up to speed, because as I said, you get there, you need a house, you need your social security number. Where do you go? Where do you apply for that? What's the documentation that you need? Because you don't have a social security number, you don't have a credit score or a credit history. So that means that you're going to be having to give deposits for everything else. That also means that if you don't have enough cash, you're going to run out of cash and then run into trouble very quickly. It also, something that no one tells you is that your first paycheck is not going to be deposited into your account until like August, end of July, August, or even later. And so if you don't plan for those first 3 months and you don't have enough cash to just give all the deposits, and cell phone, same thing, they ask you for your social. If you don't have it, then you need a deposit. I remember that I got my cell phone and they used a fake social. They just put like 11111, but then no one told me that I needed to replace that with my social so that counted in favor of my credit score. So if that's your case, you want to make sure that you call the company and that they have your social security number as soon as you get it. What else? And to me, the biggest mistake and what's really driving me trying to put the book out there is the retirement accounts.
Really?
Yes, because I had never heard what terms like 401k, 403b, 457, Roth IRA, like those are things that even people born here in this country
have no clue.
Yeah. And so as a foreign medical graduate, it's just something like they're talking in a different language.
Yes.
And
that's why I brought into the show, if you go back, my personal financial advisor into the show, just to give us a little bit of enlightenment on what it's like, because now that I'm 43 years old, I realized that I want to save X amount of money for my retirement. I'm expecting to have certain amount of lifestyle. I want to live freely and have this and have that and be able to currently travel as many vacations as I do now and spend this much money in tennis clothing and hats. And so it's crucial. And this book touches upon everything. I mean, that topic is one of many. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead. You wanted to say something specific about that.
Well, yeah, because I didn't know, at that time I was like 26 or 27. The last thing that I thought about was retirement. When I first got like the welcome package and the hospital forms and everything that you need to fill out, it's a pretty thick folder with a ton of information. And at the very end, they put the retirement accounts that they can offer to you, but they are opt-in. So they are not obligated to give that as a benefit to you. You have to opt in to get it. I didn't know that. or I guess probably I did, but I was like, these people I haven't even started and they're asking me about retirement. I didn't know, I still don't know where I'm going to retire. I was just reading like the numbers for 1K, for whatever. I didn't understand anything that was in there. And
Overwhelming. Overwhelming.
And I just opted out. And in retrospect, that's been probably my biggest mistake. Because when I was writing the book, I said, well, let me run the numbers. And so what happens is that if you opt in for a retirement account, the IRS has set limits of how much you can contribute of your paycheck pre-tax. So it's your gross paycheck. Before it pays any taxes, you can contribute a certain amount to one of these retirement accounts. Very useful to understand the fact that it is pre-tax, because that helps you lower your taxes. And it also means that that money is going to be invested and grow pre-tax without having paid taxes. And it's going to pay taxes when you retire or when you are eligible to withdraw the funds. So I didn't know any of that. And so when I was running the numbers back in 2011, when I first started, the limit of the IRS was around $16,500 per year. So if you divide that by 12, you could contribute a little over $1,000 every month of your paycheck pre-tax. Here's where it can get a little bit tricky, because then you need to know where you're going to invest the money. And I touch briefly on that in the book, because I don't want to overwhelm people with a ton of information that it's new and relatively difficult to get. But I do mention, what I would have done or what I would have chosen as the option to select the money or to put the money initially. And just the benchmark that pretty much everybody uses, especially in the financial world, is the Standard & Poor's, the S&P 500 that follows the biggest 500 companies in the US. And that's sort of like the benchmark. And so since 2012 to today, the average return on the investment that is, in the S&P 500 has been 15%.
15.
So if I add on, 15. And, some years it drops significantly, but the average over 15, and that's, what's going to happen. I also kind of explain that in the book, that if it really drops, you don't need to panic, just ride the wave, because it's eventually going to go up. And that's, what happened. And so in the past 10 years, it's been 15%. So if I had contributed 17,000 for my first 4 years as a resident in pathology, and then nothing else, nothing as a fellow, nothing outside of those retirement accounts, I would have by now over $100,000, around $130,000 that I don't have and I'm never going to have again. And that's just 10 years. Now, extend that another 20 years to when you're eligible for retirement, and that's just more than twice. So it was, to me, a really costly mistake that it was just pure ignorance, really.
So $100,000 less in your pocket. What you're saying is doctors need to get this book, need to read the book, because the book is worth less than $10 as a pre-order, and it will save you at least $100,000 as of today. So invest a little bit.
It's a good investment.
It's a very good investment. Yeah. And I'm impressed. In 11 chapters, correct? You go over every little thing that we don't know. And if we know, we barely skim the top. So, chapter 1 is about how to get a home. Chapter 2 about immigrations, visas, and the important number that is the Social Security number, I assume. Then you start moving on into episode number 3 on the basic services. We talk about cells, power, internet, laundry. Chapter number 4, you talk about MPI, licensing. Chapter number 5, what you got, but they haven't paid to you. What is that one about?
No, well, that's your credit bank accounts. Pretty much the credit score, because, it's a score that's calculated and it's made up of, I think, 5 different things and they all have different percentages. And so it's pretty easy to have a really good credit score. And the significance of having a good credit score is that when you want to buy a house, lease a car, any sort of credit that you're going to get, they're going to ask you for the number.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. I just bought a new house. I had a huge equity in my old house. So I had this huge amount of money that I said, I'm not going to spend it all crazy and go. This is the lowest mortgage I ever had in my entire life, what I'm paying right now. I didn't go crazy. I sold my house for almost $1.2 million in Florida. And I bought a $535,000 house. And I had this huge equity, like $400,000 plus dollars. And I said, I'm not going to be stupid. I put that in the market, put that in some other more stable funding, talk about all these numbers that you're saying, 401k, whatever. I put in a very safe investment vehicle. And then, I had this amazing credit that made me be eligible for a fantastic credit rate. And the score was almost 800. I didn't know that it was that good. After I started opening new accounts, hard inquiries on my score has started dripping down. And I think I'm down to like 745. And I haven't done anything crazy. It's just the hard inquiries, the credit utilization, these transactions that they have done, these things that we have moved or not, opening this new, I'm in a different state. So things didn't transfer, and all these people are asking me for deposits, and they're checking your credit for every account that they open. And my wife didn't do it, so hers is like 750. Mine is like 800 and 775, 750, 735. And I just got a report this week. It's like 724, which I'm upset about. But what am I gonna do?
Yeah, well, above 700 is pretty good. And you bring up a really good point. You just moved, and how many times have you moved?
Three in the United States.
Yeah, I've moved within, like in Miami, I moved probably 4, and then to Houston, and in Houston I moved twice, and then to San Francisco, and I've already moved twice. And so something that, again, no one told me, but that it is crucial, it's really easy to go online to USPS, and that is the website for the Postal Service, and there is a link there to forward your actual mail, anything that you get in the mail, the correspondence and everything. Then if it's sent to your old address, it's going to be automatically resent to your new address. And that is crucial because, if you are still a resident, you are on J1, you're going to get your DS 2019, through the mail. And if you moved and then it's lost, it's going to be a nightmare. Credit card state, like a bunch of things you're going to get through the mail. And so it's important just to keep that in mind. And I put, the links in the book.
Dr. Ruiz, one thing that many immigrants, I don't know how it works in India, I don't know how it works in Australia, I don't know how it works in Russia, but in Colombia, a snail mail or the slow mail that is run by the federal government in Correos de Colombia, Colombian mailing system, it is broke. It doesn't work. They give these packages to people to deliver, and they get paid 10,000 pesos to go and deliver. They never deliver. They dump it on the side of the road. They just keep the money. You never get the mail. So mail for us was not that important, at least in Colombia. We had other private ways to send letters and packages, but the standard federal run mail was really crappy. Here in America is the bone, the structure that sustains everything that happens. I mean, you might get a lot of junk on mail, but you get the most crucial, important documents on mail. You get your lawsuits on the mail.
There's a social security number. You get it like in the mail.
In the mail. So that cannot be said in any other way. And then it is amazing. I mean, the juiciness of this book is impressive. I mean, you touch on every little aspect. Bank accounts. Then in chapter number 6, you go into transportation, how to buy a car. I assume so. How to get a driver's license. Numbers. That's number 7. Chapter number 7. Number 8, you talk about taxes and how this country.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but like simple things like just the driver's license. Like the very first time that you go and get one, it's a really bureaucratic process. You need to get there early. You need to have an appointment, make an appointment beforehand online. Once you get there, you need to fill out a form. Sometimes you can fill it in advance. Then you need to take one of those tickets for your number when they call you up. And then you're going to have to do 2 tests, the practical test and the theoretical test. And I mean, those tests are hard. It's not like you can just show up and assume that you're going to know all the answers just because you've driven for a while in your country. I mean, I just put an example there of a question that you could get. It's impossible to just know. It's multiple choice, but they only allow you to have 3 or 4 wrong answers. Otherwise, you fail the test. But there are websites online where you can prepare for the test. And it's funny because I actually felt more nervous for the driving test than for the step 1 or step 2, you know, because I just couldn't, I didn't have a car. So I had to go with a friend and I just had to pass. Like I really had to pass. Otherwise I wouldn't have a driver's license. So yeah.
The psychological, the financial, the performance pressures that an immigrant like us has in America, they're huge. And this book is a must read. So chapter number 9, you talk about the retirement accounts that are so valuable. Chapter number 10, everything, health insurance, life insurance, I assume, everything that you must have.
Insurance.
How much you need to have on life insurances. And I bet you go into the types of life insurances or not.
Yeah, whole life and term. Don't do whole life. I did. It was another mistake.
I did that mistake, dude.
Yeah,
no.
mistake.
From
yes.
these financial
yeah, I don't want to
pay huge chunks of commissions for getting you into one of these. Anyway, read the book. And I guess in chapter 11 is a little potpourri of everything else that you have to say. It is amazing. In general, for an immigrant, this book has all you need to know before starting your residency and during residency that can be remarkably overwhelming. And I'm going to read it out loud. While there is not such a thing as an IMG manual for when you first get here, you know that you will have on this book a viable alternative to smooth your transition process and help you keep your immigration and financial affairs in order. So Dr. Roberto Ruiz-Cordero, as an assistant professor of pathology and IMG himself, is using his own experiences over 10 years to create this very succinct but high-yield guide to help you start your medical residency with the right foot. Each chapter will help you to get through the ordeals of steps that you need to take to cover the very essentials. So get it, pre-order. It will be available shortly and no better timing, I think, for the launching of this book and this episode 69, because everybody is about to start the residency training on July 1st. So listeners, if you get to this, get it. I'm going to make sure that I get the link for you guys to visit Amazon, purchase it, pre-order, and try to listen as soon as you can. He was, despite the fact that I bought it, he gave me a copy, and it's just a nice, concise read. Still, you know, like everything that we do, it requires some dedication, but it's the best read that you can do.
Thanks. Yeah, and I just want to add a couple of things. One, I try to keep it really short, so it's going to be probably 50 pages plus minus 10. So you could read it in 2 hours. I include a lot of links to external sources, blog posts, podcasts, where you can go in depth and learn about the topics. So I'm really just providing the very basic information. It might be too basic for some people, but for myself 10 years ago, this would have been everything that I needed to know.
A game changer.
I didn't want to include so much information that then it became overwhelming, because I tried to put myself 10 years ago. And that's how it all started. I got a bunch of emails from people that were trying to come just like myself. And I ended up writing several emails. And then I said, I'm just going to put a Word document. And so that was like the very first draft. And then I said, well, maybe I should just expand on it a little more. And so the first document that I put, and what I tried to also, like the style that I wanted the book to look like, was a letter that I wrote to myself, my younger self, and just be like, hey, dude, you're going to start, and these are all the things, like the essentials that you're going to have to take care of before you start. And please opt in for the retirement accounts, and this is why. And also something, and then, I shared the book with, or at least the draft, with a couple of colleagues I'm extremely appreciative of, because they really provided a lot of valuable feedback. Because I also didn't want the book to be my own experience, because I know that would be very limited. So I wanted for different people to come in and just ask them, what was your experience like? And the common denominator it was that it was a mess. Nobody told anyone anything, and you pretty much figure things on your own. So that was a good sign, because then I said, okay, if these guys that are now very successful had to go through the same thing that I did, the likelihood is that probably most of us, are in that same situation. And just to close, because the book has a lot of hyperlinks and it also has QR codes. And the reason for that is that if you buy the paperback, it's going to be really difficult for you to go and then type the link in your computer. So with your phone, you can just use the camera, scan the QR code, and you're going to get two things, because there are two QR codes. One thing is a Google Sheet that has a budget, a very basic budget with all the items that you're probably going to have as your expenses, rent, electricity or like services, laundry, a cell phone, Wi-Fi, maybe cable, car and gas and insurance and all of those things if you have them. It's important just to have in mind all of the things that you could potentially end up spending every month. And you can also plug in what your post-tax paycheck is going to be, and it does the calculation in terms of the cash flow and how much money are you going to have. Hopefully you're going to have at the end of the month, so that then you can be like, okay, I can spend on this or invest in this other thing, and just to try to control your very basic personal finances from the get-go. So you're going to be able to get access to that Google Sheet. And also the other QR code is another Google Sheet that has every single link by chapter to all the different resources. Because I do recommend, like, this book is going to give you the very basics, the essentials, but you're going to have to do a little bit of homework. It doesn't have to be right away. The purpose of the book was for the people that just get here to have enough information so that they can take care of the acute things in a few weeks, a month, so that when they start in July 1st, most of the things are going to be taken care of. Amazing. But then at some point throughout your first year, you're going to have to figure out how to pay your taxes. That's something that probably I had never done that. And so I do explain a little bit of that. And I have a link to a YouTube video that explains you how to do it by yourself. And I also have links to vetted accountants that could do it for you, for a fee. So you're going to have to, throughout your residency, the idea is that you start listening and reading these resources. And the resources also include your podcast, because I think, it's amazing. I just listened the other day, the no-nos, the absolute no-nos. And that's something that, again, no one, and you're going to be faced with a lot of the choices, just the simple ones of prescribing to yourself, relatives, family, and friends. So it's important that once you read the book, you get the basics, but then use those links to look at the other resources and do a little bit more reading on your side.
Wow, people like you, Dr. Ruiz-Cordero, are the ones that are allowing us to smoothen the transition process, and I can assure you're going to have a lot of positive feedback. Help me help you here. How do I get a hold of the book, or how are we going to be able to? I know you're going to give me by the end of this chapter right here on the show notes underneath the podcast. I will put it in, and you just click on it. I will send you to the link. But what's the easiest way, or how do we get a hold of your book? How do we get a hold of this valuable information that is concise and succinct and has everything that we need to be successful?
So the book is available for pre-order in Amazon, as you said. So if you just Google Amazon.com and then you type my last name, Ruiz-Cordero, then it's going to show up. It's going to show up the Spanish version and the English version. Both are for pre-order. I'm really just fine-tuning the last few details, making sure that all of the hyperlinks work, so that the plan is to put it out there so that you can just buy it early July. as soon as possible, and hopefully early July it should just be available. I know that the pre-order says that it's going to be available in August. That was just to give me a little bit of a buffer there, but I'm just pushing as hard as I can to have it available, at the beginning of July. And so you just go to Amazon and you can just click the ebook. As I said, it's probably easier if you have a Kindle or a device, even your laptop or the cell phone, because then you can just click on the hyperlinks and they'll redirect you to the different resources. But if you prefer to just have a physical copy and then read it and make notations, then know that you're going to be able to access all of the hyperlinks digitally through your phone by scanning the QR code.
This is phenomenal.
So it's only available in Amazon.
The 7,000 to 12,000 foreign international medical graduates that try to come into America every year have to read this book, because it is a must-have. It's a must-do things and a must-read, and just kind of get a heads up of what's going to happen. And for those, I think it was 2,000 to 5,000 FMGs that made it in, you got to have it and you got to read it and you have to purchase it. So just go ahead and I'm not getting any money out of Dr. Ruiz-Cordero for saying this. I just think that people like him is the ones that we want to invite over to the podcast, because he has so much to offer and I want to help him to continue, having a successful professional career here in the United States. And why not? At the same time, I'm here to help you guys out on being successful in America. And as I have said in my episodes before, I wish someone had taught me all this throughout the past, because it would have been so much smoother. And I agree with you. I didn't have those $100,000 neither. I think I had signed up for my first retirement process when I lived in Omaha, Nebraska in my second year of residency. But since then, I've been really kind of itching to put money away. Well, before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask you one more question. Your English is phenomenal. And I know that's one huge struggle. And I have this itch, this little splinter in my heel that I have not been able to rub off, is that someone said, "Thank you, Dr. Osorio. Thank you for your guest. I'm just tired of listening to people with an accent. What do you expect? I mean, everybody has an accent that comes into America that is not American, but yours is really good. How did you learn, or how do you make your English so good? Or were you an English speaker in Puebla and Mexico City before you came to the United States?"
No, and thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate them. And I actually don't really think that I know that I have a strong accent. It's a struggle to try to, because it's funny, because in our brains are just wired, especially if you speak Spanish, to pronounce every single letter. Whereas here, you cannot pronounce the letters that you see. So your brain sort of gets really confused, because then you need to memorize the pronunciation. And for example, poor and door, they're almost the same. It's just the P and the D that are different, but they both have double O's, and the I is just 4 letters. And then, you cannot say por or tor or dur. It's just, and so you have to just memorize that. And so it's really
funny, but yeah.
hard. Because your brain is just trying to speed out the letters that it sees and the way that it's used to just pronouncing.
And you made something crazy. Your English is good. Tell me how you learn it. You spoke it, or how you learn it? You picked it up on the way in Miami, or?
No. So, a little bit of everything. And I guess, Mexico, I had a little bit of English, lessons. Then my parents were phenomenal. When I was, I think, 11 or 12, they sent me to Canada to a summer camp. I didn't speak English at all. So I just didn't understand anything. But after 30 days, I kind of picked it up. And then when I was 13, my parents gave me the amazing opportunity to come to the US to do 8th grade at a boarding school up in Indiana, close to Chicago. And that's really where I learned most of the English that I now know. And I have to say that in Miami, I lived with, a roommate that's from Texas. And so, it was funny, because first time that he saw me speak, he was like, "Oh, you have a Mexican accent." Because in Miami, everyone has more the Cuban accent.
Yes, and I'm Cuban Puerto Rican.
Yeah. And so I just used to pay a lot of attention to my accent and really trying to just practice. But then I was like, screw it. Like, that means that I speak a different language.
And you were blessed that you're the son of a doctor, and probably that quite helped you out growing up. But many people are not as blessed as you are, or to
Totally
be
agree.
financially assisted by your father to succeed your dream in the United States.
I totally agree with you. And I just want to say, don't let your accent get into your path to success. What you've done in matching is a tremendous achievement. And what you're going to do as a resident is even, bigger. You are just plugging yourself into a completely different country, culture, everything else, and you're going to have to perform at your max because it is very competitive. And it is good that it is very competitive. And if you've been able to match, that means that you have what it takes to do well. And I also, just to touch back on what I put a line in the book, just to know that if people don't follow the advice that I or would have given to myself 10 years ago, it doesn't matter. You're still going to do well because you have everything going for you. So don't let simple things like an accent get in the way. Do try to learn good English. Do try to improve it if you can. But what I tell them is like, I have a really strong accent, just like tequila. It's strong and Mexican. Like it is what it is. I'm really, it's exhausting, and I'm really tired of trying to just polish it. And
Yeah, no, I think
it's as good as it's gonna get, and that's it.
We cannot let that go. Well, doctor, that's the best advice. I mean, one thing that I tell everyone, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget your culture. Don't forget your Colombian. Don't forget your Mexican. Don't forget your Peruvian. Don't forget your Ecuadorian. Or it makes you who you are. Definitely polishing a little bit our English is phenomenal, especially in people that have a lot of clinical interactions and whatnot. In your personal case, also with your lab technologies and your colleagues, is also remarkably important to have that connection. But in your conference, in all the meetings that you have to attend, I mean, God, Lord Jesus, you have published hundreds of papers, and I bet that you have spoken in lots of conferences in Mexico, the United States, across. It is impressive what you have accomplished, Dr. Cordero. And you've been writer, the head publisher in many articles. You're number one in there with your colleagues and whatnot, and I'm extremely proud of you. And I know that yourself, you have had a very arduous, painful, and difficult immigration process, and you're going through some personal challenges in immigration. And if it's gonna be the fact that you're gonna stay and remain in the United States, or if you're gonna go back to Mexico, whatever it's going to be, I really want to thank you for literally making this country great and making Mexicans proud, because it's not only tough to be a Latino, sometimes it's tougher to be Mexican. The image of the Mexicans in America, they think we're just like, the entry workers that do what no Americans wants to do. But people like you, also kind of stand out and make us feel remarkably proud. So thank you for being an amazing flagship for our Latin American, Mexican, Caribbean culture. We really appreciate it. And well, guys, I hope that this episode has brought lots of juicy, useful information. Useful, that's a new term, useful.
Good combination.
Anything else before we close it up and wrap it up that probably crosses your mind?
One important thing that people have to keep in mind is that for the most part, and I would assume almost every single IMG or FMG doesn't carry the burden of that the American medical graduates have. And so in that sense, we are already ahead of the game, because when US graduates start attending money, they are $150, $250, even $700,000 deep in debt, in the negative. So then they need to get to zero balance to start building wealth. You guys, or at least that was my experience, and I can almost speak for majority of IMGs, you start at zero already. So from your first paycheck, you can start building wealth. That is a significant, crucial difference. So you have a ton of things against you, or if not against you, a lot of challenges as an IMG. But one of the huge upwinds is the fact that you probably don't have debt. And if you do, I'm sure it's not going to be $500,000 or crazy numbers like that. So just, keep that in mind and take advantage of that. So as I put in the book, if you don't do anything that I recommend, you're still going to do well. It's really hard to screw up. But if you do just really simple opt-in, basic, essential things that are not going to take you a ton of time, the impact over your professional career is going to be huge. You have no idea how big it's going to be. And your future self is going to thank you for that.
I wish I knew that 20 and a half years ago when I touched the ground of the Miami International Airport.
Yeah, me too. But it's never too late. It's never too late.
Never too late.
Yeah.
I'm catching up. The bank account is getting a little thicker. So
good. Should. Yeah.
Amazing. Dr. Roberto Ruiz-Cordero from Mexico. This Colombia really wants to thank you. Muchas gracias. Thank you for being here.
Yes,
and to our listeners, if you want to listen to a Spanish version in the future, if you're probably interested, let us know. We can probably make an exception like we have done in the past and have 1 or 2 episodes here and there just for our Latin American Spanish speaker people. But I mean, you have the option to purchase the book in Spanish, so cannot get better than that. And obviously in English for the rest of the world. Thank you again. Episode 69 comes to a conclusion. God bless you all. Stay in touch. Keep it strong and good luck with residency training. July 1st is around the corner. Bye now. Espera pausa.